The explosion came without warning. Special Operator Sarah Reeves felt the heat before she heard the sound. Debris rained from the mud brick ceiling as her world contracted to a pinpoint of blinding light and then mercifully darkness. 30 seconds earlier, she had been moving with practiced precision through the shadowed compound in Afghanistan's Paktika province, her Belgian Malinois Ajax keeping perfect heel position. Their mission: extract a nuclear physicist held hostage by insurgents with alarming connections to international terror networks. The compound had been eerily quiet. Too quiet. Sarah's gloved fingers had moved in a precise pattern by her side. No hand signals visible to the untrained eye, but Ajax had immediately altered his posture, ears forward, muscles coiled. A barely audible whistle pitched so low that human ears would strain to detect. It had sent the dog forward in a search pattern that spoke of years of specialized training. Then Ajax had frozen his body language, shifting subtly. Sarah recognized the warning immediately. They weren't alone. She tapped her throat mic, twice the silent signal, to her team that they had company. Captain Rodriguez and Lieutenant Chen were covering the north entrance. Sergeant Wilson was watching their exit route. No verbal communication necessary. Task Force Azure operated in the spaces between words. The ambush came from above. Now, as consciousness returned in painful bursts, Sarah's first thought was not of herself, but of Ajax. She forced her eyes open, ignoring the blood trickling down her forehead. The air was thick with dust and the copper scent of blood. Her ears rang painfully, but through the high-pitched whine she heard labored breathing nearby. "Ajax," she whispered. A cold nose pressed against her hand in the darkness. Still alive. Still with her. Her relief lasted only seconds before the reality of their situation crashed down. The mission was compromised. Her team, the sound of rapid gunfire outside the collapsed section of building, answered her unspoken question. The operation had gone sideways in the worst possible way. Sarah tried to move and felt white-hot pain lance through her right leg. Something was wrong with her throat, too. When she attempted to call out to her team, nothing emerged but a strangled whisper. The blast had done more damage than she initially realized. She fumbled for her tactical light, clicked it on. The beam caught motes of dust suspended in the air, illuminating a small pocket in the rubble. Ajax's amber eyes reflected the light, his dark fur powdered gray with debris. Blood matted the fur on his left flank, but he stood guard alert and ready. Sarah's training took over. Assess, adapt, overcome. Her fingers moved again, a different pattern this time. Ajax immediately shifted into what the team called ghost mode, a specialized stealth posture developed for high-risk extraction scenarios. The dog's movements became liquid, deliberate, his breathing controlled and shallow. Together, they began navigating through the rubble, Sarah dragging her injured leg, Ajax moving as her eyes and ears. They had to reach the team, complete the mission, or at minimum escape with their lives. Sarah had no way of knowing that this night would be the beginning of a battle far different from any she had trained for, a fight not against foreign enemies, but against her own government's determination to erase her very existence. 30 days later, the fluorescent lights of courtroom 237 cast a harsh glow over everyone present, particularly on Sarah Reeves. She sat at the defense table, shoulders squared, despite her obvious discomfort, dressed in a charcoal gray blazer and navy slacks, clothes designed to blend into the background. Nothing about her appearance commanded attention, except perhaps the Belgian Malinois service dog, Ajax, resting vigilantly at her feet. Judge Gregory Daniels shuffled through documents with visible impatience, occasionally glancing up to study Sarah through narrowed eyes. His reputation for efficiency preceded him. Cases in his courtroom moved quickly, especially those he deemed wastes of the taxpayers' money. "The state calls Dr. Martha Williams," announced Prosecutor Benjamin Carter, a man whose tailored suit and perfect posture exuded confidence. Dr. Williams took the stand, adjusted her glasses, and directed her clinical gaze towards Sarah. The psychiatrist had the polished look of someone who testified often and enjoyed the spotlight. "Dr. Williams, please explain to the court your professional assessment of the defendant," Carter prompted. "Ms. Reeves presents with severe PTSD and selective mutism likely triggered by trauma," Dr. Williams stated flatly. "However, her claims regarding military service with specialized units appear to be fabricated, a common coping mechanism where patients construct elaborate alternate identities." Sarah's face remained impassive, but her fingers moved almost imperceptibly beneath the table. Ajax's ears twitched in response, though no one noticed. And these delusions about classified operations, Carter continued, consistent with paranoid ideation. There is no evidence supporting her claimed involvement in any such operations. From the gallery, Rachel Goldstein. Sarah's court-appointed defender shifted uncomfortably. An ambitious public defender with a reputation for taking on impossible cases, Rachel had been skeptical when first assigned to Sarah's case. That skepticism had transformed into determination over the past weeks. Objection, Your Honor. Dr. Williams never had security clearance to verify, Rachel interjected. Overruled, Judge Daniels cut in. Unless you can produce evidence of these supposed classified operations, counselor, Rachel faltered. My client's service records appear to have been redacted or classified. Judge Daniels' sarcasm drew scattered laughter from the courtroom. I've heard this particular fantasy before, Ms. Goldstein. Sarah watched the exchange without expression, only the slight tightening of her jaw betraying any reaction. Beneath the table, Ajax pressed closer to her leg. When asked to speak on her own behalf, Sarah opened her mouth, but no sound emerged. After several uncomfortable seconds, she scribbled something on a notepad, which Rachel read aloud awkwardly. My client wishes to state that the operation in question remains classified, but Lieutenant James Chen can verify elements of her service record. Lieutenant Chen's testimony began promisingly. The officer, still recovering from injuries sustained overseas, appeared via video link, his right arm in a complex brace. I served with Ms. Reeves on several missions, Chen stated. Can you describe the nature of these missions? Rachel asked. Chen's eyes darted to someone off camera. I'm not at liberty to discuss operational details, but you can confirm Ms. Reeves served under your command. Chen hesitated, his discomfort evident. I can confirm I know Ms. Reeves. Carter rose for cross-examination. Lieutenant Chen, do you have any documentation or official records showing Ms. Reeves' service in any special operations unit? No, sir. Those records would be classified. So you're asking this court to take your word without evidence that the defendant served in a unit so secret that no record of it exists? Chen's testimony crumbled under Carter's relentless questioning. By the time he was dismissed, any credibility he might have lent Sarah's case had evaporated. The prosecution calls Specialist Matthew Harrison, Carter announced after Chen's video feed ended. Harrison, a government expert on military records, took the stand with practiced efficiency. His precisely creased uniform and ramrod-straight posture spoke of decades in service. Specialist Harrison, have you thoroughly reviewed all available military records pertaining to the defendant? Carter asked. I have, Harrison confirmed. There is no record of Sarah Reeves serving in any special operations unit, nor any evidence supporting her claimed involvement in classified missions. What about her basic service record? There is documentation of Ms. Reeves' initial enlistment in basic training followed by a medical discharge due to psychological issues. Nothing more. Rachel stood for cross-examination. Specialist Harrison, in your experience, are there circumstances where military personnel records might be deliberately obscured or classified? Harrison shifted in his seat. In extremely rare cases, yes, such as involvement in covert operations. Objection, Carter called out. Calls for speculation. Sustained, Judge Daniels ruled without hesitation. Rachel pressed on. Is it true that certain special operations units operate with documentation that would appear to someone without proper clearance, as if the service member had been discharged? Objection, Your Honor. Counsel is testifying. Sustained, Mrs. Goldstein. Unless you have evidence to support these theories, move on. Rachel glanced at Sarah, who sat motionless, her eyes fixed on a point in the middle distance. Only Ajax seemed to react, his ears twitching slightly, as though listening to something no one else could hear. From the back of the courtroom, a distinguished older man with impeccable posture slipped in quietly and took a seat. His steel gray hair was cut military short, and a small scar traced the line of his left cheekbone. Admiral William Blackwood, though his identity remained unknown to the court, watched with calculated interest, his gaze alternating between Sarah and Judge Daniels. The significance of the small memorial pin on Sarah's collar went unnoticed by everyone except Blackwood, whose right hand absently touched an identical pin on his own lapel. During the lunch recess, Sarah sat alone in a small conference room, Ajax at her feet. She took out a small notebook and wrote something, then tore out the page and slipped it into her pocket as Rachel entered. "We need something concrete," Rachel said, frustration evident in her voice. "The judge isn't buying any of this without hard evidence." Sarah nodded once her expression unchanged. She reached into her jacket and removed a small military memorial pin, placing it on the table. It bore no unit insignia, just a simple design that could belong to any branch of service. "What's this?" Rachel asked. Sarah wrote in her notebook. "Watch Ajax during the afternoon session. Make sure the court reporter's camera is operational." "Sarah, I don't understand. How will your service dog help us prove your military service?" Sarah's eyes met Rachel's for the first time with real intensity. She wrote again, "Ajax is not just a service dog." Before Rachel could ask for clarification, a court officer knocked, announcing the session would resume in 5 minutes. As they gathered their materials, Rachel noticed a business card that hadn't been there before. It contained only a phone number, no name or organization. When court resumed, Carter called his final witness of the day, a former colleague of Sarah's from her brief documented military service. "Ms. Reeves always had these fantasies," the witness testified. "Even during basic training, she would hint at being recruited for special assignments. We all thought it was harmless until she started believing it herself." From the gallery, Admiral Blackwood watched with an unreadable expression. His attention seemed divided between Sarah and Judge Daniels, studying both with equal intensity. As the testimony continued, Sarah's right hand moved beneath the table in what might appear to be nervous fidgeting, but followed a precise pattern. Ajax's ears twitched in response, his eyes tracking something no one else was watching. By late afternoon, and even Rachel Goldstein looked defeated. The judge checked his watch repeatedly, clearly eager to wrap up what he considered a simple case of mental illness and misplaced identity. "The court will reconvene tomorrow morning at 9 a.m., Judge Daniels announced. "Mr. Carter, I assume you'll be prepared for closing arguments." "Absolutely, Your Honor," Carter replied with a satisfied smile. As the courtroom cleared, then Admiral Blackwood approached Rachel in the hallway. "You're fighting the good fight, counselor," he said quietly, "but you're using the wrong weapons." "Well, excuse me," Rachel replied, confused. "The evidence isn't in the paperwork. It never was." He pressed the business card Rachel had found earlier into her hand before walking away. Rachel looked down at the card, then back up, but Blackwood had vanished into the crowd. That evening, Sarah sat in her small apartment, Ajax lying across the doorway in a protective position that no ordinary service dog would adopt. She removed a hidden panel from the bottom of her dresser drawer and took out a small metal case. Inside was a worn photograph of 6 people in desert camouflage, their faces purposely shadowed. She touched one of the figures gently, then returned everything to its hiding place. On her phone was a text message from an unlisted number. "Closed circuit, safe to proceed tomorrow." She deleted the message immediately. The nightmares came as they always did. Fragments of the explosion in Pactica province. Captain Rodriguez's face as he realized they'd been betrayed. The nuclear physicist they'd been sent to rescue already dead when they reached him. The secondary ambush that had been waiting for them at the extraction point. Sarah woke gasping, sweat-soaked sheets twisted around her legs. Ajax was already at her side, his training allowing him to distinguish between ordinary sleep and the throes of PTSD. His solid presence anchored her to reality as the fragments of the dream receded. She checked the time, 3:17 a.m. Sleep wouldn't return now. Sarah limped to the bathroom, examining her reflection in the harsh light. The physical scars from that night in Afghanistan had mostly healed. The psychological ones remained raw. The doctors at Walter Reed had told her the mutism might be temporary or permanent. They couldn't predict which. The blast had damaged her vocal cords, but the specialists believed the continued inability to speak was primarily psychological. The official diagnosis, conversion disorder, triggered by extreme trauma. What the doctors couldn't know, was what had happened after the explosion. The things she'd seen, the choices she'd made, the promises exacted from her as the price of extraction. She splashed cold water on her face and returned to the bedroom. From beneath her mattress, she withdrew a small, tactical notebook, waterproofed and designed to withstand extreme conditions. Inside were coordinates, codes, and contact protocols written in a cipher taught only to members of Task Force Azure. Sarah flipped to a blank page and began planning her strategy for the courtroom tomorrow. If the government insisted on denying her existence, she would force them to see her on her terms. Ajax would be the key. The second day of the trial began with Prosecutor Carter's theatrical display of confidence. The defendant would have this court believe she served in an elite military unit, he announced, pacing before the jury. Yet when asked direct questions, she cannot or will not speak. Instead, were treated to notes passed to her lawyer like a child in grade school. Several jurors smirked. One openly chuckled. The government's position is simple. Sarah Reeves is suffering from delusions. She has constructed an elaborate fantasy about military service to cope with trauma of unknown origin. While deserving of compassion and appropriate psychiatric care, she is not entitled to the veterans' benefits she has repeatedly attempted to claim, nor access to the classified information she has repeatedly sought. As Carter spoke, the court reporter adjusted her camera to capture both the prosecutor and Sarah in the same frame standard procedure, nothing unusual except that her equipment seemed particularly focused on Sarah's face and hands. Rachel rose for cross-examination of the final government witness, Dr. Julian Barnes, chief psychiatrist from the Veterans Affairs Hospital. Barnes, in your professional opinion, what are we dealing with here? A textbook case of dissociative identity construction, Barnes replied confidently. Ms. Reeves has created an alternate persona as a coping mechanism. In this case, the identity of a highly trained military operative, and her mutism is consistent with her commitment to the delusion. If she speaks, the fantasy might collapse. Throughout the testimony, few noticed the small military memorial pin on Sarah's collar, or the way her eyes systematically scanned the room every 108 seconds, or how Ajax's attention shifted in perfect coordination with her subtle hand movements. No one was really looking at Sarah Reeves at all. That had always been her greatest advantage. From the gallery, Admiral Blackwood noticed both movements and straightened almost imperceptibly. His eyes narrowed as he observed Judge Daniels, whose attention kept drifting to Sarah with increasing frequency. During cross-examination, Rachel attempted a new approach. Dr. Barnes, are you familiar with the tactical sign language used by certain special operations units? Objection, Carter nearly shouted. This is absurd, Your Honor. I'm inclined to agree, Judge Daniels said with visible annoyance. Ms. Goldstein, unless you have evidence, I'd like to call a witness who can authenticate certain physical indicators. Rachel pressed on. Your Honor, this is becoming farcical, Carter protested. Next, you'll claim the service dog is also a secret operative. Scattered laughter filled the courtroom. Judge Daniels didn't bother hiding his smirk. Ms. Goldstein, you're testing my patience, the judge warned. Unless you have substantial evidence to present, I'm prepared to issue a directed verdict. Rachel glanced at the business card Admiral Blackwood had given her, then back at Sarah. Your Honor, I'd like to call retired Admiral William Blackwood to the stand. A murmur rippled through the courtroom as the distinguished man from the gallery rose and made his way to the witness stand. Judge Daniels' expression shifted slightly. Recognition, perhaps, or caution. Admiral Blackwood, Rachel began after he was sworn in, what was your role in the military before retirement? I served as Deputy Director of Special Activities Division under Naval Intelligence for 12 years. Blackwood replied, his voice carrying the weight of authority. Prior to that, I commanded Task Force Azure for 8 years. Even Judge Daniels seemed to sit up straighter. Task Force Azure was not well known in civilian circles, but within military intelligence, it carried significant weight. And are you familiar with the defendant, Sarah Reeves? Before Blackwood could answer, Carter was on his feet. Objection, Your Honor. This witness was not on the defense's list. We've had no opportunity to prepare for this testimony. Your Honor, Rachel countered. Admiral Blackwood contacted me only yesterday after observing the proceedings. His testimony is directly relevant to establishing my client's credibility. Judge Daniels hesitated, clearly weighing the impropriety against his own curiosity. I'll allow it, but keep it brief, Ms. Goldstein. Admiral, you may answer the question. I am familiar with Ms. Reeves by reputation and service record, Blackwood stated carefully. And what can you tell us about her service? Very little that isn't classified, Blackwood replied. However, I can confirm that certain operations conducted between 2017 and 2019 in the Eastern Theater involved personnel whose records would appear to anyone without appropriate clearance, exactly as Ms. Reeves appear now. Carter scoffed. This is pure speculation, Your Honor. The Admiral has not stated that he knows Ms. Reeves personally or can verify her specific involvement in any operation. That's correct, Blackwood acknowledged. I cannot confirm or deny Ms. Reeves' specific role. I can only testify to the existence of protocols that would explain the discrepancies in her record. Judge Daniels frowned. Admiral, with all due respect, this court needs more than vague allusions to classified protocols. I understand, Your Honor, Blackwood replied. Perhaps I could suggest an alternative approach. What kind of approach? Judge Daniels asked. There are certain procedural markers, physical indicators, that would be known only to personnel involved in specific operations. What kind of markers? Training protocols, particularly for service animals assigned to certain units, Blackwood explained. Command sequences that would be impossible to fake or learn secondhand. The courtroom fell silent as everyone processed this information. Sarah remained expressionless, but Ajax's posture changed slightly, becoming more alert. Your Honor, Carter interjected. This is absurd. The Admiral is suggesting we evaluate the defendant based on how her dog responds to commands. This isn't a circus. It's actually quite standard procedure in verifying claimed special operations background, Blackwood countered. When documentation is classified or unavailable, behavioral verification becomes essential. Judge Daniels studied Blackwood for a long moment. I'll allow a demonstration, but if this turns into theater, I'll not only dismiss it, but consider sanctions against defense counsel. Rachel nodded gratefully. Admiral Blackwood, could you please explain what we should look for? K-9 units assigned to certain operations receive specialized training beyond standard military working dogs, Blackwood explained. Their handlers use command protocols that combine elements of multiple languages in precise physical positioning. These protocols are classified and taught only to personnel within specific units. He turned to face the court. If Mrs. Reeves served where her partial records suggest her service animal would respond to these protocols in a way that would be impossible to train outside the program. Judge Daniels looked skeptical but nodded. Proceed with the demonstration. I won't be conducting it, Your Honor, Blackwood clarified. I only know of the protocols. Only a handler from the specific unit would know the exact commands. All eyes turned to Sarah, who sat motionless at the defense table. Ms. Reeves, Judge Daniels addressed her directly, impatience evident in his tone. If you wish this court to consider this line of evidence, you'll need to participate actively. Sarah looked at Rachel, who nodded encouragingly. Then she took out her notepad and wrote something, handing it to her lawyer. Rachel read aloud, My client requests that the court reporter ensure all video equipment is functional for the record. The court reporter nodded, adjusting her camera slightly. For the record, Judge Daniels said, the court reporter is recording these proceedings as standard practice. Now, Ms. Reeves, please proceed with whatever demonstration the Admiral has suggested. Sarah remained seated, looking straight ahead. The seconds ticked by in awkward silence. Your Honor, Carter said with barely concealed triumph, it appears the defendant is unable or unwilling to perform this alleged demonstration. I move that we... Sarah raised her hand slightly, stopping Carter mid-sentence. Then she reached into her pocket and removed a small object, a weathered challenge coin, bearing no recognizable insignia. She placed it on the table in front of her. Admiral Blackwood nodded almost imperceptibly. Your Honor, Carter protested. What possible relevance does this coin have? Judge Daniels held up his hand. Let's see where this goes, Counselor. Sarah closed her eyes briefly, then opened them with new focus. Her posture shifted subtly, shoulders squared, chin slightly raised. It was as though a different person had suddenly occupied her body. She glanced down at Ajax, who had been lying quietly beneath the defense table throughout the proceedings. Without speaking, Sarah made a series of subtle hand gestures. Fingers splayed, then 3 fingers extended, then a circular motion. Ajax's ears pricked forward, his body tensing with immediate alertness. He moved from his relaxed position to a precisely controlled stance, weight distributed evenly, head perfectly, level eyes forward. The transformation was subtle but unmistakable to anyone familiar with military working dogs. This was not the body language of a service animal responding to a standard command, but the tactical positioning of a combat-trained canine. Judge Daniels leaned forward slightly, his expression shifting from skepticism to curiosity. Sarah made another hand signal, right hand flat, then three fingers curled, followed by a barely audible whistle pattern. Ajax responded by executing a precise series of movements, shifting position to create a triangulation point between himself, Sarah, and the courtroom entrance. His head turned at exact 30-degree intervals, scanning in a pattern that military handlers would recognize as a security sweep protocol. "Your Honor," Carter began, but his voice lacked its earlier confidence. Admiral Blackwood spoke up. "What you're witnessing, Your Honor, is a room-clearing protocol taught only to K-9 units assigned to certain special operations teams. It's not something that could be learned from videos or books. The specific pattern and timing are classified." Judge Daniels' expression had grown increasingly serious. "Admiral, are you suggesting—" "I'm not suggesting anything, Your Honor," Blackwood interrupted carefully. "I'm merely confirming that what we're observing is consistent with protocols used by units whose operations remain classified." The courtroom had grown eerily quiet. Even Carter seemed at a loss for words. Judge Daniels studied Sarah with new eyes. "Ms. Reeves, do you wish to make a statement to this court?" Sarah looked directly at the judge for the first time. She opened her mouth as if to speak, then closed it again. Instead, she wrote something on her notepad and handed it to Rachel. Rachel read Operation Ghostwalk Paktika Province Team Echo, February 17, 2019. Authorization code Kilo Echo 793. The effect on Judge Daniels was immediate and startling. His face paled visibly and he gripped the edge of his bench. "Your Honor," Carter asked, alarmed by the judge's reaction. Judge Daniels composed himself with visible effort. "This court will take a 30-minute recess. Counselors in my chambers immediately." As they rose to leave, Sarah made one final hand gesture to Ajax. The dog immediately returned to his standard service animal posture, the transformation so complete it was as if the previous demonstration had never occurred. In the gallery, several spectators exchanged confused glances. Only Admiral Blackwood remained impassive, watching as Judge Daniels left the courtroom with unusual haste. As Sarah sat alone at the defense table, Ajax pressed against her leg, she allowed herself the briefest moment of grim satisfaction. The first battle in her war for recognition had been joined. The government had denied her existence on paper. Now they would have to face her in the flesh, and they would learn what her enemies in Afghanistan had discovered at terrible cost. Underestimating Sarah Reeves was always a fatal mistake. Behind the glass walls of the judge's chambers, court observers could see an animated conversation unfolding. Judge Daniels appeared to be speaking with unusual intensity, his gestures becoming increasingly agitated, while Carter's confident demeanor visibly deflated. Rachel stood near the window, her expression a mixture of confusion and cautious hope. Inside the chambers, the atmosphere was electric with tension. "I need to know exactly how you came into contact with Admiral Blackwood," Judge Daniels demanded, his voice barely controlled. Rachel hesitated. "He approached me yesterday after court, Your Honor. He gave me his card and suggested there was evidence beyond paperwork. And you had no prior contact with him?" "None whatsoever." The judge turned to Carter. "Benjamin, I need to speak with someone at the Pentagon now." Carter blinked in surprise. "Your Honor, I don't understand what's happening here. This theatrical display with a trained dog hardly constitutes—" "That authorization code," Judge Daniels cut him off. "Who provided it to your client, Mrs. Goldstein?" "Sarah wrote it herself, Your Honor. I've never seen it before." Judge Daniels moved to his desk phone and dialed a number from memory. "This is Judge Gregory Daniels, authorization Sierra Tango 77421. I need to speak with General Marshall immediately." He turned to both attorneys. "Wait outside. This is now a matter of national security." Once alone, Rachel approached Carter in the hallway. "What just happened in there?" The prosecutor shook his head, visibly shaken. "I don't know. I've never seen Daniels like that before." At the defense table, Sarah sat motionless, Ajax at her feet. Her face revealed nothing, but her eyes constantly scanned the room, cataloging exits, potential threats, and changes in the environment, the habits of someone who had lived under constant threat. Admiral Blackwood approached cautiously, taking the empty seat beside her. For a long moment, neither acknowledged the other. You took a risk, he finally said, voice low enough that only she could hear, using that particular authorization code. Sarah removed her notepad and wrote, calculated risk. Daniel was JAG for Azure. Blackwood nodded. We need to talk, not here. She wrote again, tonight, 2100, Jefferson Memorial. The Admiral stood and walked away without another word, passing Rachel as she returned to the defense table. Sarah, Rachel whispered urgently, what's happening? The judge is making classified calls and Carter looks like he's seen a ghost. Sarah wrote, wait. The courtroom doors opened and Judge Daniels returned. His demeanor had transformed, completely gone. Was the impatient skepticism replaced by something resembling guarded respect or perhaps caution? In light of information presented to this court in chambers, I'm ordering a brief adjournment to allow the prosecution to reassess their position. Carter, looking distinctly uncomfortable, nodded in agreement. The state requests until tomorrow morning, Your Honor. Granted, Judge Daniels replied. Court is adjourned until 9:00 a.m. tomorrow. As spectators filed out discussing the unusual turn of events, Sarah remained seated, her posture relaxed but alert. Rachel leaned close. Did we just win? What happened? Sarah wrote. Not yet. Meet me outside. We need to talk. The Lincoln Memorial reflecting pool mirrored the cloudy sky as Rachel and Sarah walked its length, Ajax maintaining perfect heel position. Few tourists were around in the late afternoon chill, giving them privacy amid the open space where listening devices would be difficult to deploy. I need you to explain what happened in that courtroom, Rachel said. That code you wrote, the judge recognized it. How? Sarah handed Rachel a note she'd prepared earlier. Daniels was a JAG officer assigned to Task Force Azure from 2009 to 2015. He handled the legal architecture for Operation Ghostwalk and similar missions. So he knows you served, Sarah nodded. Then why has he been so dismissive of your case? Another prepared note. Plausible deniability. Until I proved my identity through Ajax, he had to maintain the fiction that I don't exist. Rachel stopped walking. This is insane. You're telling me a federal judge has been deliberately sabotaging your case because what, he's under orders? Sarah's expression remained neutral, but she wrote, national security protocols. The operations I participated in remain classified. The people I worked with, some are still in the field. But you were injured in service. You deserve recognition, medical benefits. Sarah touched Rachel's arm, a rare gesture of physical contact. She wrote, this isn't just about me. There are others like me, people who served but don't exist on paper. Rachel ran a hand through her hair in frustration. So what happens now? I need to meet Blackwood tonight, alone. I don't like this. As your attorney, Sarah cut her off with a sharp gesture. She wrote, trust me, tomorrow will be different. As they turned to head back, Sarah noticed a man in a dark overcoat watching them from the steps of the Lincoln Memorial. His stance, the way he scanned his surroundings, military. She made a subtle hand signal to Ajax, who immediately shifted position, placing himself between Sarah and the observer. The man nodded once in acknowledgement and walked away. Who was that? Rachel asked. Sarah didn't respond, but her eyes followed the man until he disappeared from view. At 9:00 p.m. sharp, Sarah arrived at the Jefferson Memorial. The tourist crowds had thinned, leaving only a few visitors admiring the illuminated monument. Ajax padded silently beside her, more alert than his service dog vest would suggest. Admiral Blackwood stood at the base of the rotunda, gazing up at Jefferson's statue. His military bearing was unmistakable, even in civilian clothes. You're punctual, he said as she approached. That was always your reputation. Sarah raised an eyebrow questioningly. Oh yes, I know about you, Operative Reeves. Not everything, but enough. He gestured toward a secluded spot away from other visitors. Your testimony today created quite a stir at the Pentagon. Using that authorization code was bold. She removed a small notepad from her pocket and wrote, bold is sometimes necessary. Indeed, Judge Daniels nearly had a coronary. That code was restricted to 6 people involved in Operation Ghostwalk. 3 are dead. Sarah wrote, why did you come to court? You could have stayed invisible. Blackwood's weathered face creased in a humorless smile. The same reason you forced the issue with your demonstration. Things need to change. He pulled out a thin file folder. This is the Wilson Protocol. It was developed after Vietnam when we realized certain operators needed to be removed from the system. Protection for them, protection for the missions. Sarah nodded. She knew the protocol well. The problem, Blackwood continued, is that the system designed to protect operators like you is now being used to deny them benefits, medical care, and recognition after service. She wrote, why help me us specifically? I commanded Azure for 8 years. I authorized the formation of Echo Team, the first mixed-gender special operations unit. When the mission in Paktika went sideways, I was the one who implemented the protocols that erased your team from the records. Sarah's expression hardened. I didn't know then that the system would be turned against you, Blackwood said, regret evident in his voice. When I heard about your case, I had to intervene. She wrote, what happens tomorrow? Judge Daniels has received confirmation of your identity from General Marshall. The prosecution will withdraw their objections. You'll get your benefits, your medical care. He paused. But there's more at stake here. Sarah tilted her head questioningly. Your case isn't isolated. Dozens of operators from classified units are being denied care, their service records manipulated or hidden. The system designed to protect them is being weaponized. She wrote, the video from court today. Blackwood nodded. Already being secured by certain parties at the Pentagon. Your demonstration with Ajax was compelling. If it were to become public, Sarah's eyes narrowed. I'm not suggesting anything, Blackwood said carefully. I'm merely pointing out that sometimes the most effective way to change a broken system is to expose it. Not the operations themselves, but the injustice. He handed her a small memory card. Everything you need to know about the hearing tomorrow. Judge Daniels will be more accommodating. As they parted ways, Blackwood added softly, Captain Rodriguez and Sergeant Wilson would be proud. They always said you were the best of them. Sarah froze momentarily, then nodded once and walked away, Ajax at her side. The nightmare was always the same. Sarah found herself back in the collapsed building in Paktika province, dust filling her lungs, the copper taste of blood in her mouth. But in the dream, Ajax wasn't there. She was alone, trapped, her leg pinned beneath debris. Radio chatter in her earpiece. Echo Team, report status. Captain Rodriguez's voice tight with urgency. She tried to respond, but no sound emerged from her throat. Echo 3, do you copy? More insistent now. The crushing weight of silence. Her inability to warn her team. Then the sound of gunfire closer now. The death of her team playing out while she lay helpless, mute, unable to save them. Sarah jerked awake, a silent scream trapped in her damaged throat. Ajax was already pressed against her side, his warm presence anchoring her to reality. She reached for him, burying her fingers in his thick fur, focusing on his steady heartbeat until her own slowed to match it. The digital clock read 3:17 a.m. She rose knowing sleep would not return and moved to the window. The streets of Washington, D.C. were quiet, a rare moment of stillness in the capital. From her dresser, she retrieved the memory card Blackwood had given her. Her laptop booted silently, and she inserted the card, finding a single encrypted file. Her fingers moved across the keyboard, entering a series of codes known only to members of Task Force Azure. The file opened to reveal detailed notes on Judge Daniels' military career, his involvement with Operation Ghostwalk, and most importantly, his knowledge of the Wilson Protocol. Blackwood had included communications between the Pentagon and the Veterans Affairs Office regarding Sarah's case, evidence of deliberate obstruction. More troubling were the files on other operators, men and women whose service had been erased, whose medical claims had been denied, whose sacrifices had been buried beneath layers of classification and bureaucracy. Sarah's jaw tightened. This wasn't just about her benefits anymore. This was about justice for all of them, the ghosts who had served their country and been abandoned. She closed the laptop and returned to bed, Ajax settling beside her. Tomorrow would bring resolution to her case, but it would also be the beginning of a new mission, one perhaps more important than any she had undertaken for Task Force Azure. The courtroom was packed. The following morning showed word having spread about the unusual proceedings the day before. Sarah sat at the defense table, her posture subtly different, more assured, less defensive. Ajax lay at her feet, apparently relaxed but constantly monitoring the room. Judge Daniels entered precisely at 9:00 a.m., his usual brisk efficiency replaced by a measured deliberation. He surveyed the courtroom carefully before speaking. Before we proceed, I wish to address a matter of procedure, he began. Yesterday, information came to light that requires special consideration. He turned to Carter. Mr. Carter, does the prosecution wish to make a statement? Prosecutor Carter rose slowly, his confidence noticeably diminished. Your Honor, after consultation with my superiors, the state wishes to withdraw all challenges to Ms. Reeves's veteran status and benefit claims. A murmur spread through the courtroom. Judge Daniels allowed it to continue for several seconds before raising his hand for silence. I see, he said. Would you care to explain the reasoning behind this decision? Carter cleared his throat. New information has been brought to our attention that renders the state's position untenable. We believe recognition of Ms. Reeves's service is in the interest of justice. Very well, Judge Daniels replied. Does defense counsel have any objection? Rachel appeared as surprised as anyone. No, Your Honor, the defense welcomes the prosecution's decision. Judge Daniels nodded. Then the court recognizes Sarah Reeves's military service as claimed and orders all appropriate benefits and medical care to be provided forthwith. He paused, his expression solemn. The court also extends its apologies for any difficulties Ms. Reeves may have experienced in securing the recognition she deserves. The formal language couldn't disguise the extraordinary nature of what was happening. Judges rarely apologize to defendants, particularly not after spending days openly skeptical of their claims. This matter is hereby resolved with prejudice, Daniels continued. Ms. Reeves, the court thanks you for your service to this nation. As Sarah stood to leave, Judge Daniels did something even more unexpected. He stood as well, a sign of respect rarely shown to defendants. The court reporter's camera captured this transformation, focusing on the judge's face as he watched Sarah gather her belongings. Outside the courtroom, reporters swarmed, shouting questions. Rachel moved to shield Sarah from the crowd, but Sarah simply walked through them with quiet dignity, Ajax creating a natural buffer between her and the press. Miss Reeves, can you comment on the sudden dismissal? Is it true you served in a classified military unit? Why won't you speak about your service? Sarah maintained her silence, moving steadily toward the courthouse exit where Admiral Blackwood waited. Reeves is not giving interviews at this time, Rachel announced to the persistent reporters. Please respect her privacy. As they reached the courthouse steps, the court reporter, who had been documenting the proceedings, approached cautiously, holding out a business card. Ms. Reeves, she said quietly, my name is Diane Lawson with Justice Watch. The footage from today's proceedings will be on our secured server. I thought you should know. Sarah accepted the card with a nod of acknowledgement, noticing the small American flag pin on Lawson's lapel, identical to the one Blackwood wore. 3 hours later, Sarah sat in Admiral Blackwood's office at the Naval War College in Newport, Rhode Island. The room was spartanly furnished walls adorned with maps and a few photographs of naval vessels. A display case held medals and commendations, their significance understood only by those with the highest security clearances. Blackwood closed the door and activated an electronic jamming device. We're secure. You can speak freely here. Sarah shook her head and wrote, voice still unreliable. I understand. The doctors at Walter Reed believe it may return with time and therapy. He sat behind his desk. Your case has created quite a stir at the Pentagon. General Marshall is personally reviewing the Wilson Protocol and its implementation. She wrote, not enough. Others are still being denied. Yes, which brings me to why I asked you here. Blackwood opened a secure laptop. The court footage has been contained for now, but there are concerns about potential leaks. Sarah's expression remained neutral. Certain individuals within the Pentagon believe the footage should be destroyed entirely. Blackwood continued. Others, myself included, see an opportunity. He turned the laptop to face her. On screen was a rough cut of the courtroom video, edited to focus on the demonstration with Ajax and Judge Daniels' reaction. The footage was compelling, a silent woman and her dog, revealing a truth so powerful it forced a federal judge to stand in respect. If this were to become public, Blackwood said carefully, it would raise questions about how veterans from classified operations are treated. It might create pressure for systemic change. Sarah wrote, you're suggesting deliberately leaking classified proceedings. I'm not suggesting anything official. I'm merely pointing out that Justice Watch has a reputation for publishing materials in the public interest, and Ms. Lawson seems to have taken an interest in your case. Sarah studied the Admiral's face, searching for deception or manipulation. Finding none, she wrote, "You think this was the plan all along? My case is a test balloon." Blackwood's expression softened slightly. "Not initially. But when your claim crossed my desk, I saw an opportunity. You're unique, Sarah. A female operator from a classified unit with a service animal that can demonstrate your training beyond doubt. Your story is compelling." She wrote, "using me to force policy change. In a manner of speaking, but also giving you the recognition you deserve." He leaned forward. "This isn't just about benefits. It's about acknowledging the sacrifice of operators like you, Rodriguez Wilson, and all the others who don't exist on paper." Sarah stared at the video playing silently on the laptop. Judge Daniel's face as he recognized the significance of her demonstration with Ajax. The moment when the system was forced to acknowledge what it had tried to erase. She wrote, "What happens to Ajax and me after this becomes public? Your identity will remain protected. The focus will be on the system, not on operational details. As for Ajax," Blackwood smiled slightly, "he's already being called the most decorated Secret Service dog in America in certain circles at the Pentagon." Sarah closed her eyes briefly, considering. When she opened them, her decision was made. She wrote, "I'll need guarantees for the others. All of them." "Already in motion," Blackwood assured her. "General Marshall has authorized a complete review of all cases involving operators from classified units. The Wilson Protocol is being revised to ensure service members receive proper care while still protecting operational security." She wrote one final note. "Then let's proceed, for Rodriguez and Wilson." Blackwood nodded solemnly. "For all of them." 1 week later, Sarah sat on a park bench watching families enjoy the autumn afternoon. Ajax lay at her feet, alert but relaxed. Her phone showed dozens of notifications from news outlets seeking interviews following the leak of the courtroom footage. The viral video titled "Judge Stands When He Realizes Who's Really on Trial, the Silent Operator" had accumulated millions of views within hours. Comment sections filled with speculation about Sarah's background and the classified operation she may have been part of. News outlets picked up the story, running segments with titles like "Silent Witness, the Mystery Woman Who Stunned a Federal Judge," and "Service Dog or Military Asset, Courtroom Demonstration Raises Questions." More importantly, veterans advocacy groups had seized on the video as evidence of systemic problems in how operators from classified units were treated after service. Congressional hearings had been announced, and the Department of Veterans Affairs had issued a statement promising a review of policies. A young veteran with a prosthetic leg approached, stopping a respectful distance away. He said nothing but offered a silent nod. Sarah returned it with quiet dignity. "They're saying you were with Team Echo in Paktika," he said quietly. "I was with support operations in the region. Lost my leg when our convoy hit an IED." Sarah studied him carefully, then reached into her pocket and removed her weathered challenge coin, displaying it briefly before returning it to her pocket. The veteran's eyes widened slightly. "I thought so," he said. "There are rumors going around about what happened to your team. Some of us have been trying to get the records unsealed for years." Sarah took out her notepad and wrote something, handing it to him. He read it and nodded. "I understand. Thank you." He turned to leave, then paused. "For what it's worth, those of us who know, we remember every day." As he walked away, more veterans began appearing in the park, some in pairs, others alone. None approached directly, but all acknowledged Sarah with silent respect, a nod, a subtle salute, a hand over heart. They formed a loose protective circle around her bench, creating a buffer between her and curious onlookers drawn by the recent publicity. Admiral Blackwood arrived last, taking a seat beside her on the bench. "The videos have created quite a stir," he observed. "The Pentagon is officially declining to comment, which is telling enough." Sarah nodded, unsurprised. "There's discussion about formally recognizing your team's actions," Blackwood continued. "The political climate has shifted enough that certain operations can now be acknowledged at least partially." Sarah took out her notepad and wrote, "The others first." Blackwood nodded. "Of course, Rodriguez and Wilson's families have already been notified. Chen as well." She wrote again. "And Santos. Still in recovery at Walter Reed. His condition has improved enough that he's been asking about you. Says you still owe him 20 from a bet in Kandahar." For the first time since the trial began, Sarah smiled. Brief but genuine. "There's something else." Blackwood said, his tone growing more serious. Judge Daniels served as a JAG officer during the initial classification of Operation Ghostwalk. He was one of the legal architects who designed the documentation protocols that essentially erased your team from official records. Sarah's expression revealed nothing but Ajax shifted positions slightly, pressing closer to her leg. He recognized the operation code name immediately, Blackwood continued. More importantly, he knew that only 6 people were authorized to know both the code name and the specific date you mentioned, and only 3 of them are still alive. Sarah wrote, "Why did he allow the case to proceed at all?" "Plausible deniability," Blackwood replied. "Until you demonstrated the K9 protocols, he could maintain the fiction that you were just another claimant with delusions of grandeur. Once you proved otherwise, he had no choice but to contact his former superiors." She nodded, understanding the layers of protection that had been established around operations like hers. "There's been a security review launched," Blackwood added. "Carter had no idea what he was stepping into when he prosecuted your case. Someone higher up should have flagged your file before it ever reached court." Sarah wrote, "It wasn't a mistake. Someone wanted this public." Blackwood's eyebrows rose slightly. "You think this was deliberate? To what end?" Sarah gestured around the park where veterans continued their quiet vigil at a respectful distance. "A signal to others that they haven't been forgotten," Blackwood interpreted, "that operations like yours might eventually be acknowledged." She wrote, "A reminder that silence doesn't mean absence." "Well," Blackwood said after a thoughtful pause, "if that was the intent, it seems to be working. The videos have over 20 million views now. There's talk of congressional inquiries into how veterans from classified operations are treated by the VA and benefit systems." As they spoke, a young woman approached cautiously, stopping several feet away. She clutched a small bouquet of flowers, clearly nervous. "Excuse me," she said. "I don't mean to intrude, but I wanted to thank you. My brother was a translator for American forces in Afghanistan. He always said there were operations that saved countless lives but would never be acknowledged. Seeing you stand up for the truth, even silently, has meant so much to our family." She placed the flowers on the edge of the bench and stepped back, her eyes shining with emotion. Sarah nodded in acknowledgement, her expression softening slightly. As the young woman walked away, Blackwood smiled. "You've become something of a symbol, Operative Reeves, not exactly standard procedure for someone with your background." Sarah wrote one last note. "Nothing about our mission was ever standard." She stood, signaling the end of their conversation. Ajax rose immediately, positioning himself at perfect heel position. As Sarah walked away, her posture straight and confident, the scattered veterans throughout the park stood in silent respect. A wordless acknowledgement of a truth they all understood. Some battles continue long after the gunfire stops, and some victories are won, not with weapons, but with the courage to stand when the world insists you remain invisible. 2 days later, Sarah returned to her apartment to find a small package waiting outside her door. There was no return address, no markings of any kind. Ajax sniffed it cautiously, showing no signs of alarm. Inside her apartment, Sarah opened the package carefully. It contained a formal military decoration in a case with no markings, a bronze star with V for Valor, accompanied by a note that read simply, "Authorized at the highest level. Long overdue." She ran her fingers over the metal, remembering the night in Paktika province. The mission had been compromised from the start. The nuclear physicists they'd been sent to rescue had been executed minutes before their arrival. The ambush that followed had claimed Rodriguez and Wilson. Chen had lost an arm. Santos had barely survived multiple gunshot wounds. And Sarah had lost her voice literally and figuratively, erased from the records, unable to speak of what had happened, carrying the weight of that night alone. Until now. She placed the medal in the small metal case where she kept her team photograph and challenge coin. Not displayed, not forgotten. That same afternoon, Judge Gregory Daniels announced his retirement from the federal bench, citing a desire to work on Veterans Affairs issues. In his first post-retirement interview, he referenced the viral courtroom video that had brought attention to his career. Sometimes, he told the interviewer, justice requires us to acknowledge what cannot be spoken. There are men and women serving this country whose sacrifices will never be publicly recognized. That doesn't make those sacrifices any less valuable or deserving of honor. When asked if he was referring to anyone specific, Daniel smiled. I'm not at liberty to say, but I will tell you this. In my 30 years on the bench, I've never been more humbled than when I realized who was standing before me in that courtroom. The clip of his interview paired with the original courtroom footage sparked a new wave of interest in Sarah's story. Veterans organizations reported unprecedented increases in donations and volunteers. Military forums buzzed with renewed discussions about classified operations and the toll of silence on those who served. Through it all, Sarah maintained her silence. But that silence no longer meant invisibility. The rehabilitation center at Walter Reed Medical Center was quiet on Sunday mornings. Sarah walked the polished corridor, Ajax at her side, carrying a small package under her arm. The staff nodded respectfully as she passed, some recognizing her from the video, others simply acknowledging another visitor to the wounded warriors recovering within these walls. Room 412 was at the end of the hall. Sarah knocked softly and entered to find Lieutenant James Chen sitting by the window, the empty sleeve of his hospital gown pinned neatly. His face lit up when he saw her. "Reeves, about damn time you visited." His smile faltered slightly. "Still not talking, huh?" She shook her head and handed him the package. Chen opened it to find a framed photograph of their team, the original from her hidden case now in a simple frame. His eyes moistened as he touched the faces of Rodriguez and Wilson. "I saw the video," he said quietly. "Pretty slick move with Ajax. The brass must be losing their minds." Sarah smiled and nodded. "They're saying things might change now, that operators like us might actually get the benefits we earned without having to fight tooth and nail." He set the photograph on his bedside table. "Rodriguez would have loved this. He always said you'd be the one to change things." Sarah removed her notepad and wrote, "How are you healing?" "Better every day. They've fitted me for a prosthetic arm, high-tech stuff. Should be operational in a few months." He gestured toward Ajax. "What about you? Any progress with the voice?" She shook her head. "It'll come back," Chen said with confidence. "You're too stubborn to stay silent forever." Sarah wrote, "Santos, 2 floors up. Still critical, but stable. Doctors say he'll make it, but it's going to be a long road." She nodded, making a mental note to visit later. "Blackwood came to see me yesterday," Chen continued. "Said they're forming a task force to review cases like ours. Asked if I'd consider serving as an advisor once I'm out of here." Sarah raised an eyebrow questioningly. "I told him I'd think about it. Not sure I'm ready to dive back into that world." Chen's expression grew serious. "What about you, Reeves? What's next?" She wrote, "Working with service dogs at the VA center. New mission." "Always the operator." Chen laughed. "Find a mission complete. It moved to the next one." His smile faded. "Do you ever wonder if it was worth it? What we did over there?" Sarah didn't write a response immediately. She looked out the window at the autumn leaves falling across the hospital grounds, considering the question. Finally, she wrote, "We saved who we could. We honored our word. That has to be enough." Chen nodded slowly. "Yeah, I suppose it does." As Sarah rose to leave, Chen called after her, "Hey Reeves, tell Ajax he's famous now. First canine celebrity in special ops." Ajax's ears perked up at his name, and Sarah smiled, making a small hand gesture that caused the dog to perform what looked like a slight bow. Chen's laughter followed them into the hallway. Outside Walter Reed, Sarah paused at the memorial garden, a quiet space dedicated to fallen service members. She found a secluded bench and sat Ajax settling at her feet. From her pocket, she removed a small voice recorder prescribed by her speech therapist, an exercise in vocal rehabilitation. She pressed record and held it close to her lips. For several moments, nothing happened. The silence stretched, broken only by the distant sounds of traffic and birdsong. Then, barely audible at first, a single word: "Remember." Her voice was rough, damaged, little more than a whisper, but it was a beginning. Ajax's ears perked up at the sound, and he pressed closer to her side. Sarah stroked his head, the bond between them transcending words. The mission was changing, evolving. No longer about surviving in silence, but about ensuring others would be heard, about transforming absence into presence, silence into testimony. For the operators who served in shadows, for Rodriguez and Wilson, for all those who had been erased. One word at a time, the footage changed everything. By Friday morning, the courtroom video had amassed over 30 million views across various platforms. Major news networks ran segments analyzing the silent exchange between Sarah and Ajax, bringing in military dog handlers and body language experts, to decode what they had witnessed. Veterans groups organized demonstrations outside VA offices across the country, demanding reviews of denied benefit claims for operators from classified units. In Washington, the pressure was mounting. A bipartisan group of senators called for hearings on what they termed the invisible veterans crisis. The Secretary of Veterans Affairs issued a statement promising a comprehensive review of protocols regarding service members involved in classified operations. Sarah watched it all unfold from the quiet of her apartment, maintaining her silence even as her story gave voice to thousands. The morning sun filtered through the beams as she performed her daily physical therapy exercises, Ajax watching attentively from his bed. Her legs still ached when rain threatened, and the doctors at Walter Reed had explained the nerve damage might never fully heal. But it was her voice that remained the most profound casualty of that night in Paktika province. The speech therapist had been encouraged by her whispered, "Remember 3 days ago," a breakthrough she'd called it. Sarah was less convinced. The word had emerged after weeks of attempts, and she hadn't been able to replicate it since. Her phone chimed with a text message from Rachel. "CNN running another segment on your case. Pentagon spokesperson scheduled to make statement at noon. Thought you should know." Sarah nodded to herself. The wheels were turning, now gaining momentum. Blackwood had estimated it would take months for significant policy changes to materialize, but the public reaction had accelerated the timeline dramatically. Her doorbell rang, startling her. Sarah wasn't expecting visitors, and few people knew her address. Ajax immediately shifted from relaxed pet to alert guardian, moving to position himself between Sarah and the door. Through the peephole, Sarah saw a young woman in a Navy uniform. Lieutenant Commander insignia service ribbons, indicating multiple deployments. Not someone Sarah recognized. She opened the door cautiously, Ajax at heel position. "Ms. Reeves." The officer's posture was perfect, her expression professional. "Lieutenant Commander Rebecca Hayes, I've been asked to deliver this to you personally." She extended a sealed envelope bearing the Department of Defense logo. Sarah accepted it with a questioning look. "Admiral Blackwood suggested I wait for a response," Hayes added. Sarah gestured for the officer to enter and closed the door behind her. Hayes remained standing, hands clasped behind her back, while Sarah opened the envelope. Inside was a formal letter on Pentagon letterhead. "The Secretary of Defense requests the presence of Sarah Reeves at a confidential briefing regarding Task Force Azure and Operation Ghostwalk. February 10, 2025, 0900 hours, Pentagon Conference Room E317. This communication is classified, secret no foreign." Beneath the formal request was a handwritten note from Blackwood. "They're ready to acknowledge everything. Your choice whether to attend. Security protocols in place either way." Sarah studied the letter for a long moment, then wrote a brief note on her pad. "I'll be there." Hayes nodded. "Admiral Blackwood thought you might say that. He asked me to give you this as well." She handed Sarah a small object, an electronic access badge with Sarah's photograph and the Defense Department seal. "That will get you through security," Hayes explained. "A car will pick you up at 0800 on the 10th. She hesitated, then added more softly, "It's an honor to meet you, Ms. Reeves. What you've done for operators like my brother, it means more than you know." Sarah tilted her head questioningly. "My brother served with Unit 7721. Technically, he doesn't exist either. At least he didn't until last week when his benefits were suddenly approved after 3 years of denials." Hayes smiled. "The system is changing, Ms. Reeves. Because of you." After Hayes departed, Sarah examined the Pentagon badge, turning it over in her hands. The photograph was recent, likely taken from the courtroom video. The clearance level indicated was higher than she'd held during her active service. Ajax nudged her hand, sensing her contemplation. Sarah scratched behind his ears, taking comfort in his solid presence. Whatever awaited her at the Pentagon, she wouldn't face it alone. The Pentagon's imposing structure loomed against the morning sky as the black SUV carrying Sarah and Ajax approached the security checkpoint. Lieutenant Commander Hayes, serving as escort, handed the guard their credentials. "Special clearance for Conference Room E317, she explained. The guard examined Sarah's badge, then Ajax's specialized service animal credentials. His eyes widened slightly in recognition, but his professional demeanor never wavered. "Proceed to Visitor Entrance B. You'll be met there." The corridors of the Pentagon were a labyrinth of power and secrecy, each identical hallway concealing departments responsible for operations that shaped world events. Sarah moved through them with practiced calm, though it had been years since she'd walked these halls. Ajax maintained perfect heel position, his specialized training evident in how he navigated the crowded passages. At conference room E317, Admiral Blackwood waited, along with three individuals. Sarah didn't recognize an older woman in an Air Force general's uniform, a middle-aged man in a tailored civilian suit, and a younger man whose bearing screamed military, despite his lack of uniform. Sarah, Blackwood greeted her formally. "Thank you for coming." He gestured to the others. General Catherine Marshall, Joint Special Operations Command, Director Andrew Keller, Defense Intelligence Agency, and Commander Thomas Wright, Current Task Force Azure. Sarah nodded acknowledgement to each. She noted Wright's careful study of Ajax professional assessment from one handler to another. "Please have a seat," General Marshall indicated. "What we're about to discuss remains classified at the highest levels, despite recent public developments." Sarah took her notepad from her pocket, ready to communicate. "That won't be necessary," Director Keller said, sliding a tablet across the table. "For security purposes, we've prepared this for written communications. Everything entered is automatically logged in the classified system." Sarah accepted the tablet and typed, "Why am I here?" General Marshall leaned forward. "Operation Ghostwalk, the mission in Paktika province. We need your complete account of what happened that night." Sarah's expression hardened. She typed, "My after-action report was submitted to Commander Rodriguez before he died. Classified Ultra." "We have Rodriguez's report," Blackwood confirmed. "But there are discrepancies, information that doesn't align with intelligence received subsequently. We believe Captain Rodriguez may have omitted certain details to protect you and the surviving team members," General Marshall added. Sarah studied each face carefully before typing. "Why Now mission was 4 years ago. The landscape has changed," Director Keller explained. "Your courtroom demonstration forced acknowledgement of Task Force Azure's existence. Congress is demanding answers about ghost operators being denied benefits. The classification walls are coming down, Ms. Reeves." Commander Wright spoke for the first time, his voice carrying the weight of someone who understood field operations. "We're not just here about the past. Task Force Azure is being reconstituted with a new mission focus. Your experience is invaluable." Sarah's eyes narrowed. She typed, "I'm medically retired, not looking for reinstatement." "We're not asking you to return to field operations," General Marshall clarified. "We're offering you a position as training coordinator for the K-9 division of the reconstituted task force. Your work with Ajax demonstrated capabilities we thought lost when the original program was discontinued." Sarah sat back surprised. She hadn't expected this turn. "Before we discuss that possibility," Blackwood interjected, "we need your complete account of Paktika, the unredacted truth." Sarah looked down at Ajax, who remained alert at her feet. The dog sensed her tension, pressing closer to her leg in silent support. After a long moment, she began typing the story unfolding on the tablet screen, the full classified reality of what had happened during Operation Ghostwalk. Paktika Province, Afghanistan, February 17, 2019. The mission parameters had been clear. Extracted Dr. Naveed Malik, a Pakistani nuclear physicist, being held by insurgents in a compound near the Afghan-Pakistan border. Intelligence indicated Dr. Malik possessed critical information about nuclear material smuggled from former Soviet states. Echo team had deployed under cover of darkness 6 operators with specialized skills. Captain Marcus Rodriguez, commanding. Lieutenant James Chen, communications and tech. Sergeant Kevin Wilson, demolitions. Staff Sergeant Michael Santos, sniper. Corporal David Reyes, medic. And Sarah Reeves, K-9 handler and infiltration specialist with Ajax. The insertion went smoothly. Blackhawks dropped them 10 miles from the target, and the team proceeded on foot across treacherous mountain terrain. Ajax moved ahead, scouting for threats, while Sarah monitored his subtle signals. 4 hours later, they reached the observation point overlooking the compound, a cluster of mud brick buildings surrounded by a crumbling wall. Intelligence had indicated 8 to 10 hostiles guarding one high-value target. Thermal showing 12 heat signatures. Chen reported, studying his equipment. "One isolated in the northeast building, likely our package." Rodriguez made the call, standard extraction. "Wilson, you're on diversion. Chen and I take the main courtyard. Santos provides overwatch. Reyes stays with the exfil road. Reeves and Ajax secure the package. The team moved into position as darkness provided cover. Wilson's diversionary explosion at the southern wall worked perfectly, drawing guards away from the main compound. Sarah and Ajax entered through a narrow window, moving silently through darkened corridors, guided by Chen's real-time intelligence from surveillance drones. They reached the room where Dr. Malik was supposedly held. Ajax's behavior changed subtle signals indicating something was wrong. Sarah paused, hand raised to halt their advance. Something felt off. She eased the door open with the barrel of her weapon. Dr. Malik lay on a simple cot, throat cut, blood still fresh. This wasn't a hostage situation, it was an execution. And they'd arrived minutes too late. Sarah signaled to Rodriguez through her comm. Package expired. Repeat, package expired. Rodriguez's response was immediate. Abort mission. Extraction protocol Alpha. That's when everything went sideways. As Sarah turned to leave, Ajax suddenly alerted a specific posture indicating explosives. She froze, scanning the room. There, beneath Dr. Malik's body, a pressure plate detonator. The whole scenario crystallized in her mind with terrible clarity. This wasn't just a hostage situation gone wrong. It was a trap designed specifically for the extraction team. Ambush, she hissed into her comm. Room is rigged. Compound is a setup. Rodriguez's voice crackled through. All units fall back to exfil point Charlie. Immediate evacuation. Sarah began carefully backing out of the room, Ajax maintaining perfect formation beside her. They had nearly reached the corridor when the first shots rang out, not from outside, but from within the compound. Contact inside the building, Santos reported over comms. Multiple hostiles approaching from the east corridor. Sarah and Ajax took cover as bullets splintered the wooden doorframe beside them. The mission had been compromised at the deepest level. Someone had known they were coming. Wilson's status, Rodriguez demanded over comms. Silence. Wilson report. The explosion that followed shook the entire compound. Sarah felt the floor give way beneath her, and she and Ajax plummeted into darkness as the building collapsed around them. When she regained consciousness buried in rubble, her first thought was for Ajax. The dog had survived, though injured. Her leg was pinned, and something felt wrong with her throat, dust debris, or worse. She could hear gunfire outside Rodriguez and the team engaging the ambushers. She tried to call out to warn them about the trap, but only a strangled whisper emerged. Using hand signals, she directed Ajax to find a way out. The dog understood immediately, carefully navigating the collapsed structure until he found an opening. Together, they escaped the rubble into the chaos of the firefight. What Sarah witnessed next would haunt her forever. Wilson lay dead near the southern wall, his body torn apart by the secondary explosion that had been waiting specifically for him. Someone had known his role as demolitions expert. Rodriguez was engaged in close-quarters combat with 3 insurgents, his movements precise and lethal. Chen was wounded but still fighting, providing covering fire from behind a low wall. Sarah moved to join them, but Ajax suddenly tensed his training, alerting to another threat. She followed his gaze to the rooftop where Santos had established his sniper position. Santos was still there, but he wasn't alone. A figure stood behind him, not an insurgent, but a man in Western tactical gear. As Sarah watched in horror, the man raised a pistol to the back of Santos's head. Sarah raised her weapon, but the distance was too great for an accurate shot. She tried to shout a warning, but her damaged voice produced only a whisper lost in the chaos of battle. The man on the rooftop turned as if sensing her attention. Though she couldn't see his face clearly in the darkness, something about him seemed familiar. Santos, alerted by some sixth sense, spun at the last moment. The bullet meant for his head struck his shoulder instead. He grappled with his attacker, both men tumbling from the rooftop to the courtyard below. Sarah raced toward them, Ajax at her side. Santos lay unconscious, bleeding heavily. The other man was already rising, weapon raised. Ajax launched forward without a command, years of training translating to instant action. The dog struck the attacker with precise force, clamping onto his arm. The man screamed, his face now visible in the moonlight. Sarah froze in shock, recognizing him instantly, CIA liaison officer Thomas Grant, who had briefed them on the mission 48 hours earlier. Grant managed to throw Ajax off and fled into the darkness of the compound. Sarah wanted to pursue but couldn't leave Santos bleeding out. She applied a tourniquet to his shoulder while Ajax stood guard. Rodriguez appeared beside her, breathing hard from combat. Wilson's down. Chen's hit bad. What the hell happened in there? Sarah pointed to Santos, then in the direction Grant had fled, trying desperately to communicate through gestures what she'd witnessed. Rodriguez's expression hardened as he understood. Betrayed from inside. Damn it, he raised his comm. Reyes, emergency evac now. We've got multiple casualties. The extraction that followed was chaos. The team's planned escape route was compromised, forcing them to fight their way to the secondary landing zone. Chen lost consciousness from blood loss. Santos remained unresponsive. Rodriguez took 2 bullets protecting their retreat, but refused to fall. When the extraction helicopter finally arrived, Sarah and Reyes loaded the wounded aboard. Rodriguez provided covering fire, his movements slowing as his own wounds took their toll. "Get on board," he shouted to Sarah as insurgents closed in. Sarah shook her head, pointing to Rodriguez. She wouldn't leave him behind. "That's an order. Reeves, complete the mission." The helicopter couldn't wait any longer. Insurgents were approaching from all sides. With Ajax at her side, Sarah made the hardest decision of her career. She boarded the helicopter, watching through tear-filled eyes as Rodriguez turned to face the advancing enemies alone, buying them the time they needed to escape. The last image she had of Captain Marcus Rodriguez was of him standing defiantly, weapon raised, as the helicopter lifted away. The room was silent as Sarah finished typing her account. General Marshall read it first, her expression grave. She passed the tablet to Director Keller, whose face paled visibly at certain passages. "CIA Officer Grant," Keller finally said. "You're certain?" Sarah nodded firmly. "This aligns with intelligence we received 6 months ago," Blackwood confirmed. "Pakistani intelligence recovered communications suggesting American assets were compromised by a foreign intelligence service. Grant disappeared 3 days after Operation Ghostwalk. His body was found in Islamabad 2 weeks later, apparent suicide." "Convenient," General Marshall remarked dryly. Commander Wright studied Sarah intently. "Your vocal injury, it wasn't just from the explosion, was it?" Sarah shook her head and typed psychological component. "Couldn't warn team about Grant. Couldn't save Rodriguez. Survivor's guilt manifesting physically." Wright nodded in understanding. "I've seen it before." "What happened after extraction?" General Marshall asked. "Your debriefing was conducted by CIA personnel, not military intelligence." Sarah typed, "Standard protocol was compromised, separated from Chen Santos and Reyes immediately upon landing at Bagram. Debriefed by CIA Deputy Director Alan Merrick. Told official story would be that Dr. Malik was never found, mission failed due to faulty intelligence. Rodriguez and Wilson listed as killed in helicopter crash. All records classified ultra or erased. And you were medically discharged with a psychological diagnosis, effectively discrediting any account you might give," Blackwood added grimly. "Santos never regained consciousness to corroborate your story," Director Keller noted. "Chen was too severely injured to fight the official narrative. Reyes accepted a position with a CIA contractor 3 weeks later." General Marshall finished, "Currently operating in Eastern Europe." Sarah's eyes widened at this new information. "The agency effectively silenced everyone who knew what really happened," Blackwood said, "until your courtroom demonstration forced the issue into the open." Sarah typed, Why tell me this now?" General Marshall leaned forward. "Because we're reopening the investigation into Operation Ghostwalk. Deputy Director Merrick retired last month. His replacement found irregularities in the handling of Echo Team's debriefing. Your courtroom video provided the leverage needed to push for full disclosure. We believe Grant wasn't acting alone," Director Keller added. "Someone higher up was protecting foreign assets for unknown reasons. Dr. Malik may have been eliminated because he could identify American collaborators." Sarah sat back, processing the implications. For 4 years she'd carried the truth alone, unable to speak, it haunted by the faces of Rodriguez and Wilson, by her failure to warn the team about Grant's betrayal. She typed, "What happens now? Justice," Blackwood said simply. "For Rodriguez, for Wilson, for all of you." "In official recognition," General Marshall added, "the President has authorized posthumous Silver Stars for Rodriguez and Wilson. Chen Santos and Reyes will receive Bronze Stars with V device. And you, Ms. Reeves," she slid a document across the table. Sarah read it with widening eyes. "The Navy Cross," Blackwood confirmed, "for extraordinary heroism in combat. The second highest decoration awarded to members of the Navy or Marine Corps." Sarah shook her head and typed, "I don't deserve this. I couldn't save them." "You saved Chen and Santos," Commander Wright countered. You identified the traitor. And now, years later, your actions in that courtroom are saving countless other operators who've been denied recognition and care. Sarah looked down at Ajax, who had remained vigilant throughout the meeting. The dog had saved her life that night in Paktika, and every day since, anchoring her to reality when nightmares threatened to overwhelm, giving her purpose when the silence became too heavy to bear. She typed, "What about Ajax? He's the real hero." For the first time, General Marshall smiled. "We've thought of that as well. Ajax will be the first military working dog to receive the Animals in War and Peace Distinguished Service Medal in a classified ceremony." Sarah placed her hand on Ajax's head, feeling a wave of emotion she hadn't allowed herself in years. "There's one more thing," Director Keller said, his tone shifting to something more cautious. "The court reporter, Diane Lawson from Justice Watch." Sarah looked up sharply. "She's requesting an exclusive interview. Not about operational details, but about the systemic failure to recognize operators from classified units. The Pentagon is conflicted about this request." Sarah considered this for a long moment, then typed, "My choice." "Completely," Blackwood assured her. "Whatever you decide, you'll have full security coverage. But this could be an opportunity to ensure the changes we're implementing become permanent." Sarah nodded slowly, then typed, "I'll do it, but I set the boundaries." "Understood," General Marshall agreed. "In the training position with the reconstituted task force." Sarah looked at Ajax, then back at the assembled officials. She typed, "When do we start?" 3 weeks later, Sarah sat in a quiet corner of the Lincoln Memorial, waiting for Diane Lawson. Ajax lay at her feet, seemingly relaxed but constantly monitoring their surroundings. The ceremonial events of the past weeks had been both healing and difficult. The private ceremony at Arlington National Cemetery, where Rodriguez and Wilson were posthumously honored. The emotional reunion with Chen Santos and Reyes. The survivors of Echo Team together for the first time since that night in Paktika. The classified briefing where Sarah learned the full extent of the conspiracy that had led to their ambush, a network of compromised intelligence assets that reached into the highest levels of the CIA. Justice was being served slowly but surely. Deputy Director Merrick was under investigation. 3 other CIA officers had been quietly removed from service. The system that had silenced and erased operators like Sarah was being dismantled and rebuilt. And through it all, her voice remained elusive, present in momentary whispers, then retreating into silence. The speech therapist remained optimistic, but Sarah had made peace with the possibility that some wounds might never fully heal. Diane Lawson approached, carrying a small bag over her shoulder. She moved with the careful awareness of someone with military training, though nothing in her Justice Watch biography mentioned service. "Ms. Reeves," she greeted Sarah, "thank you for agreeing to this interview." Sarah nodded and gestured to the bench beside her. "Before we begin," Lawson said, "I want to be clear about the parameters. No operational details. No classified information. Focus on the systemic issues affecting operators from classified units. Is that acceptable?" Sarah nodded again and took out the specialized tablet she'd been given for secure communications. "I should also tell you," Lawson continued, "that Justice Watch has been approached by several other operators in situations similar to yours. Your courtroom video opened the floodgates." Sarah typed, "That was the intention." Lawson smiled. "I suspected as much. Admiral Blackwood is quite the strategic thinker." Sarah's eyes narrowed slightly. "Oh yes, I know Blackwood," Lawson confirmed. "We served together years ago, before I traded my uniform for a press badge." Sarah typed, "You were military intelligence." "Naval intelligence." Lawson nodded. "Until I discovered certain discrepancies in how operators were being treated after classified deployments. My own brother was denied medical benefits after a mission that never happened." "Sound familiar?" Sarah nodded, understanding dawning. "So I found another way to serve," Lawson explained. "Justice Watch was founded by former intelligence officers committed to accountability without compromising national security." Sarah typed, "You and Blackwood planned this. The courtroom video, the public pressure. Let's say we recognize an opportunity when it presented itself." Lawson smiled. "Your case was compelling in ways others weren't. A female operator, the demonstrable skills with Ajax, a clear record of service that had been erased. The perfect storm to force systemic change." Sarah wasn't sure whether to feel used or validated. Perhaps both. She typed, "What do you need from me? Your story, the parts you can tell, the struggle for recognition, the impacts on your life, the changes you hope to see." Lawson removed a small recorder from her bag. No video, just audio, and you can communicate however you are comfortable. Sarah took a deep breath, considering. For 4 years, she had lived in silence, her voice, her service, her sacrifices all erased. Now she had an opportunity to speak for all the others who remained in the shadows. She pointed to the recorder and nodded. Lawson pressed record. "This is Diane Lawson with Justice Watch interviewing Sarah Reeves, former special operator and subject of the now famous courtroom video that has prompted congressional hearings on the treatment of veterans from classified units." Sarah reached for her tablet, but then paused. Instead, she leaned closer to the recorder, summoning the fragile whisper that had begun to return in recent weeks. "Remember them?" she said, her voice rough but audible. "Remember all of them." The story broke on a Monday morning. The Silent Operators, America's Forgotten Warriors, ran as an exclusive on Justice Watch, then spread to major news outlets within hours. Sarah's interview, a combination of her whispered statements and typed responses, put a human face on an issue that had previously been hidden behind classification walls. Without revealing operational details, she conveyed the reality of operators who return from classified missions to find themselves erased from the system, denied benefits, and left to fight bureaucratic battles while still healing from physical and psychological wounds. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Veterans organizations rallied around the cause. Congressional hearings accelerated. The Department of Defense and Veterans Affairs announced joint reforms to ensure operators from classified units receive proper care while maintaining necessary operational security. By Friday, the Secretary of Defense held a press conference announcing the formation of a specialized division within the VA dedicated to handling classified service cases. "No operator who serves this nation will be forgotten or denied care," he promised. "Not on my watch." Sarah watched the press conference from Walter Reed Medical Center, where she was visiting Santos. His recovery had been slow but steady, and recent surgeries had improved his prognosis significantly. "Look at that," Santos grinned, gesturing to the television. "You're changing the world, Reeves, and you barely had to say a word." Sarah smiled and squeezed his hand. "Chen told me about your new position with Task Force Azure," Santos continued. "Training the next generation of canine handlers. Perfect fit for you and Ajax." She nodded, a sense of purpose settling over her. The position offered a way to serve again, to pass on the specialized knowledge she and Ajax had developed to ensure the sacrifices of Rodriguez and Wilson continued to make a difference. "They're talking about me joining the program too, once I'm fully recovered," Santos added. "Sniper instructor. What do you think, the old Echo team back together in a new way?" Sarah's smile widened. She took out her voice recorder, a tool she now carried everywhere as part of her therapy, and pressed record. "Family," she whispered the words, still rough but growing stronger with each attempt. "Damn right," Santos agreed, eyes glistening. "Always were, always will be." As they sat together, the news transitioned to a report on the congressional hearings. The camera showed a room filled with military officials, legislators, and veterans advocates. Admiral Blackwood was visible at the witness table, his testimony apparently making a powerful impression based on the reactions of the committee members. "He did good by us," Santos observed, "when so many others wouldn't." Sarah nodded in agreement. Blackwood had taken a significant career risk by orchestrating the exposure of the Wilson Protocol's misuse. His actions had likely cost him any chance at further advancement, but had secured a legacy far more meaningful than additional stars on his shoulder. The sound of footsteps in the hallway drew their attention. A moment later, Chen appeared in the doorway, his prosthetic arm now fitted with a more advanced model than the one Sarah had seen previously. "Reunion time," he announced with a grin. Behind him stood Corporal David Reyes, looking older and more weathered than when Sarah had last seen him, but unmistakably their team's medic. "Reyes," Santos exclaimed, "you son of a gun! Thought you were playing spy games in Eastern Europe. Got recalled when this one blew up the internet." Reyes jerked his thumb towards Sarah. "Some things are more important than cover assignments." The 4 surviving members of Echo Team gathered around Santos's hospital bed, the bonds forged in combat strengthened rather than weakened by the years and hardships that had followed. Ajax moved among them, receiving affectionate greetings from each the dog, as much a member of the team as any human. Rodriguez would be proud, Chen said, voicing what they were all thinking. This is exactly what he would have wanted, the truth coming out, the system changing, the team still looking out for each other. Sarah reached for her voice recorder again, determined to honor their fallen leader with more than just thoughts. For Marcus, she whispered, the effort evident, but the words clear. For Marcus, the others echoed, raising imaginary glasses in salute to their captain. And for all the others, Reyes added, the ones still fighting to be recognized. Sarah nodded, feeling a sense of completion of mission accomplished, yet also the beginning of something new. Echo Team had gone to Afghanistan to rescue one man. They had failed in that mission, but years later they were helping to rescue thousands, all the operators, who had served in silence, whose sacrifices had gone unacknowledged, whose wounds had gone untreated. Some battles continued long after the gunfire stopped. Some missions spanned years rather than hours. Some victories came not from violence, but from truth finally spoken aloud. 1 month later, Sarah stood at attention in a private ceremony room at the Pentagon, Ajax at perfect heel position beside her. The room was filled with high-ranking military officials, members of Congress, who had championed the reforms, and the families of Rodriguez and Wilson. On a small table at the front of the room lay medals of valor, posthumous silver stars for Rodriguez and Wilson's bronze stars for Chen Santos and Reyes, and the Navy Cross for Sarah. Beside them was a specialized medal for Ajax, the Animals in War and Peace Distinguished Service Medal, with a custom ribbon denoting classified operations. The ceremony was closed to the press, the details still protected by necessary classification, but the recognition was real and official. Echo Team was no longer erased from history. The Secretary of Defense spoke eloquently about sacrifice and service, about the special burden carried by those who operate in the shadows. He acknowledged the system's failures and promised continued reforms to ensure no operator would again be denied recognition or care because of classification. When it came time for Sarah to receive her medal, she stepped forward with Ajax. The secretary pinned the Navy Cross to her uniform, then knelt to affix Ajax's medal to his special service vest. The nation may never know the full details of your service, the secretary said, but we know its value and we honor your sacrifice. Sarah had prepared for this moment with her speech therapist for weeks. She took a deep breath, steadying herself. When she spoke, her voice was still rough, still damaged, but clear enough to be heard throughout the room. For the silent ones, she said, each word deliberate and hard-won, past, present, and future. Later, as the formal ceremony concluded and the attendees mingled, Sarah found herself face-to-face with Rodriguez's widow Maria and their teenage son Marcus Jr. He always said you were the heart of the team, Maria said, tears glistening in her eyes, that when everyone else was focused on the mission, you remembered they were still human. Sarah struggled to find words, her fragile voice threatening to fail under emotion. Marcus Jr. stepped forward, a young man on the cusp of adulthood with his father's determined eyes. Dad's last letter mentioned you and Ajax, said you two moved like one being, that it was something special to witness. Sarah knelt and gestured for Ajax to sit beside her. From her pocket, she removed the challenge coin she had carried since Pactica, Rodriguez's personal coin, that he had pressed into her hand before their final mission. He would want you to have this, she managed to whisper, placing the coin in the young man's palm. Marcus Jr. closed his fingers around it, nodding solemnly. Thank you for making sure he wasn't forgotten. As the Rodriguez family moved away, Admiral Blackwood approached. The president's letter just arrived at the VA, he said quietly. The new protocols for classified service recognition have been officially implemented, effective immediately. Sarah nodded, satisfaction evident in her expression. You've changed the system, Sarah, Blackwood continued. Hundreds of operators are already receiving the recognition and care they deserve. She looked around the room at her teammates, at the families who finally had closure, at the officials who had been forced to acknowledge a broken system and commit to fixing it. Worth it, she whispered. Absolutely, Blackwood agreed. And your work at Task Force Azure will ensure these changes become permanent. The next generation of operators will never face what you did. Sarah placed her hand on Ajax's head, drawing strength from his steady presence, as she had countless times before. Together they had survived battlefields, in bureaucracy, betrayal, and vindication. Their journey had transformed from a personal fight for recognition into something far more significant, a reckoning that would benefit generations of operators to come. As the ceremony concluded, Sarah and Ajax walked out into the crisp autumn air. The Washington Monument stood tall against the clear blue sky, a reminder of enduring principles that sometimes required sacrifice to uphold. A group of veterans waited respectfully outside, having heard through unofficial channels about the ceremony. As Sarah emerged, they stood at attention, offering silent salutes, acknowledgement from those who understood service without need for explanation. Sarah returned their salute, then continued walking Ajax at her side. Their path forward was clear now, teaching, advocating, ensuring the system remained accountable to those who served in silence. Some stories ended with dramatic resolution, with villains vanquished and heroes celebrated. But Sarah knew that real change came more quietly through persistent effort and unwavering commitment to truth. The courtroom demonstration had been a catalyst, but the real work continued daily in hospitals, in offices, in training facilities, in congressional committees. As they reached her car, Sarah paused to look back at the Pentagon, where decisions affecting operators around the world were made daily. For years, she had been voiceless within that system, erased and forgotten. Now her silence had become her most powerful weapon, her story a rallying cry for change. She opened the car door for Ajax, who jumped in and settled comfortably. Before getting in herself, Sarah took out her voice recorder for one final practice of the day. "Mission complete." She whispered, the words growing stronger with each repetition. "Mission complete." Ajax's ears perked up at the sound of her voice, still recognizing the command even after all they had endured together. Sarah smiled and got into the car, setting course for their next assignment, continuing the work that had begun in a courtroom with a simple command whispered to a dog who remembered even when the world had forgotten. Some battles were fought with weapons, others with words. Some victories were proclaimed loudly, others whispered so quietly that only those who truly listened would hear. But in the end, it was the quiet truths that often echoed the longest, resonating through systems and generations, creating change that endured long after the sound itself had faded away.